Hello, all of my students from HS358D and from HS103. This is your Professor Donald Earl Collins. I want to talk to you about your assignment, final sort of big thing to talk about regarding your assignment. I had thought about talking to each and every single one of my classes tomorrow during virtual, or originally in person, but now virtually, about what you did well and what you didn't do so well on your assignments across the board. I mean, common things that were in all of my classes, in all of my sections, things that I couldn't have possibly anticipated because it's my first semester at Loyola University, Maryland. So I don't really know what students generally are like, what to expect in terms of their writing skills, their ability to turn a phrase or cite sources or write a thesis statement or back things up with evidence or understand what an opinion essay is. Now have some clue as to what all that is, and so I can give you some general broad feedback. For those of you who really didn't do well at all, maybe some of this will help. For those of you who didn't do so well, some of it might not help because there might be unique situations. For some of you did well, I mean, it's hard to learn from what you did when you have a high grade like a 98 or a 95 or whatever. But this is what it will, and I'm doing this because I don't want to have to repeat myself 4 times for 10 to 20 minutes because there's a lot of stuff that folks did and didn't do as well as they should have been able to do given the nature of this assignment and how long y'all had to do this assignment. So it'll take 10, maybe 15, maybe even 20 minutes going through all of this for all of you so that you can figure out, so that maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, but at least it tells you where, what, happened regarding the grading process beyond just a rubric and, my overall, my general thoughts. So let me share this with you. This is a list of all the things that came up over the course of 102 essays over the last 8-9 days of grading. Just a lot. And it's just typical really of, well, some of this is typical, some of it's actually not typical for me, right? Some things you would think students should know, a lot of things, but either way, let me just go through the list. First is about your thesis. Thesis not clearing the Y hurdle. This is true probably for 75% of you. And this is a problem that is not unique to students at Loyola. This is something I see all the time. You write a thesis, it's all right, I have a general sense of what you're going to do, what you're going to argue, that sort of thing, but you never explain why. There's this sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's somehow it's self-evident that this is important. Well, it's obviously of some importance because you've been asked a question to answer it, and that's really the real reason why. But if you're going to argue something, which is what you were supposed to be doing with this, whether it was, in the form of an opinion essay or personal essay or a big idea essay, or for many of you, as it turned out to be a book review, a critical book review. Why is this important? Why should I care? Why should anyone who reads this care? Most of you had trouble with that question. But there are a quarter of you who nailed it. Some have nailed it in very vivid and wonderful ways, and it was a joy, made it much easier to read. So many of you, of that 75% I just named, 75 or so students, more than half of you basically wrote your thesis in the last sentence of the last paragraph, your concluding paragraph. Somewhere at that point, you managed to write a thesis statement, and or at least one that was better than what you had at the beginning of your essay, right? And which, if you scroll down further to where it says why the thesis and the conclusion problem, I don't understand this. This is a very high school kind of thing. This is unique. This is not something I typically see from students anywhere, right? To basically, act like that they're writing a full-fledged mystery novel that the thesis will not be revealed into the end. What's the point of me reading then? What's the point of anybody? What's the point of you writing it if you don't know what you're talking about till the end? I talked about this in weeks 4 and 5, especially week 4, as you were grinding your teeth, trying to do a review of the essay that I had assigned for a class for that week, that Thursday, which happened to be something I wrote. I guess some of you thought, well, you were just doing this because you have a big ego, because you're a narcissist. Well, maybe I am a little bit of a narcissist, though I've scored a 9 out of a possible 39 or 40 on the scale, which is low, really low, actually, for narcissism. That's neither here nor there. The truth of the matter is, I gave you that and told you this for a reason, because that's the way I do things. At least I used to do it this way. When I had trouble writing, because I didn't know what I was arguing about. And sometimes what I was arguing about was actually incorrect as I did the research. So I had to reconfigure what my introduction would be. And the best way to do that is to write out what you got for a draft and then come back and go, you know what? Is the conclusion clearer about what I try to do than the intro? And most of the time, especially when you're new to writing consistently well, that's going to be the case. So you might as well replace it with the introduction and keep going, right? Replace that original introduction, just delete it. Put that conclusion in there as your introduction, with the thesis statement in there, and then move on. Otherwise, what you end up with is sort of this thing where you're not communicating why this is important. You're not communicating why I should be reading. You're not communicating beyond just the what. You don't even get to the how, much less the why of things. And that's important. That's why this is worth so much. It sets everything else up. Even if everything else set up is mediocre, doing that well gets you probably at least an 80. That's a B minus B right there. Unless you are completely off topic, the rest of your essay, in some cases, people did go off topic. That this is what happens. I mean, if you go unless you go off topic, you're going to get a good grade doing this alone, right? Here's some other stuff. I'm just going to go through it. Run-on paragraphs. You've heard on run-on sentences that run on and on and on. A few of you had problems with that too. But run-on paragraph is when you've got multiple paragraphs just squished into one. And so you just jump from one topic to the next topic, to the next topic, to the next topic, until you're done with talking. I'm done with this book. Boom, next book. One topic, 2 topics, 3 topics, 5 topics. There's many as a dozen. I found as many as a dozen topics in some of these paragraphs that went on for 2 pages, 2.5 pages, 2 paragraphs covering 4 pages. Is there a reason why we're limiting the number of paragraphs you can possibly have in the 1,000-word or 1,500-word essay? Is there a rule that if you have too many paragraphs, you lose points? I don't recall having that in the rubric. I'm sure that's not a rule anywhere. Break stuff up. Give your ideas and points a chance to breathe. Make it make sense so that I'm not struggling to try to figure out what you're trying to say paragraph to paragraph, because you've squished all your paragraphs together like you're trying to build an atom bomb and make it explode, right? Or trying to build the sun, trying to generate enough gravity to create fusion or something, right? So you don't need to run on and on and on and on and on. It's okay. Here's a couple that I didn't spend a lot of time on because I don't want to offend people who were offending me, but nevertheless offended me, not in a fully personal way. I'm just in terms of as writing. The N word. Yes, your books had the N word in it. Both of your books, actually. I think, no, one of your books definitely had the N word in it in both classes. And there are other offensive terms that people use, but particularly this applies to both classes actually. For the book Passing and the book The Underground Railroad, right, by Colson Whitehead. Just because the author is using the N word doesn't mean you have to too, right? Be sensitive to the fact that the person who's reading this might be sensitive about your use of the N word, particularly Yeah, and I'm going to be honest with this about this here. Almost all the students who did this were white. There were a few who weren't, but the vast majority of students who did this were white. And it's probably not good for you even quote. You can redact the word. You can put in dash word. You can put in asterisk in between the N and the R so that you're not writing out the word, right? I mean, I had a couple of students who used the word in their essay 5, 6, 7 times. I mean, you made your point. You don't need to keep using the word, right? You're writing for clarity. You're writing to, you know, entice readers not to turn them off, right? And this would be a turn off, not just for me. I mean, don't worry. I mean, I'm not going to take it personally. I don't think anyone's necessarily a racist here because of this or not. But you've got to be more sensitive about who you're writing for, right? Or your audience. You know your professor is black, right? I said that the first day of class, right? So maybe not use the N-word that or redact it when you're quoting for it, right? There are other things that people threw in that probably were offensive too. But that was the one that popped out to me the most because it was being used by far the most. It's kind of an obvious one. There's a rule, there's a new rule that's been around since the middle of 2020, but people have been arguing about this for longer than that. And the rule exists across writing platforms. Being black for people who are African American, if you're calling them black, is capitalized, period. Almost none of you capitalize B, and it didn't matter who the people were black, white, Latinx, Asian, whomever. Everyone seemed to think that the lowercase b in black was kind of fine, even though it's been a rule for journalists and scholars for more than 2 years now, going on 2.5 years. I mean, this made international headlines the day it happened. The people I normally publish with, who I've been arguing about the capital B with for years, finally said, okay, we're publishing everything with capital B in black now. So you should have been doing the same. Here's some other things that are just kind of like, I don't understand. You know, be consistent. And this was definitely one that was directed towards the women characters of books more than the male characters, right? Gatsby always got Jay Gatsby or Gatsby. He wasn't called Jay. Claire Kendry's husband wasn't just um, wasn't just Ken, it was either, John Billou or Billou, but he wasn't called John, right? But Daisy Daisy and Claire and what's her name, and Irene. You were even calling the author by her first name, kept calling her Nella in some cases, even though she's the author. Her last name's probably more important here. Whereas no one went and called Fitzgerald F. Scott. I did have a couple of students who did Colson Whitehead's name and called him Colson. I'm like, do you know Colson Whitehead? Do you have him on your personal speed dial on your iPhone? Probably not. You probably that's no, you're writing for, you're not writing to him. You're writing to people who don't know him. So by right, you should be able to record, should be able to write down his name as either Colson Whitehead or just his last name Whitehead. I had a couple of students who were calling him other names like Wilson. Who's Wilson? Yeah, unless you're talking about Woodrow Wilson, I don't know, right? I already talked to you about the thesis and conclusion issue. Italicized book titles. I don't know why people were putting book titles in quotes. I don't know why people weren't italicizing book titles or doing anything with them at all. I know AP style varies for those of you who actually are training to become journalists. But the truth of the matter is that for the purposes of this course and any other history course, all book titles are supposed to be in italics. I don't care what kind of essay you're writing. They're always italicized. It used to be you just had to underline them, but with computers for the last, say, 35 years, it's italicized. Proper nouns. I mean, like proper nouns, roaring 20s. Great Depression, transatlantic slave trade, American Revolution, Haitian Revolution. All those are proper nouns, and every first letter in a proper noun is supposed to be capitalized, right? But people couldn't be bothered to do that. Again, a lot of these things are not are common. These are common for, across classes, across universities, for because an entire generation of kids have been haven't done as much writing as my generation had to do going to school, primarily because of teaching to test for 25 years. So it's understandable. But then there are other things, right? Like, for example, right underneath here, this is where my cursor is. Follow basic instructions, 12-point fonts, double spaces in a single space. Put your name at the heading at the top of your paper, at the first page, adding a bibliography in your essay. These are all things that were not only listed in the syllabus, but were listed on the instructions for the assignment when I posted the assignment at the beginning of week 4. They were all listed. And depending on the person, there are some people who did none of this, right? I didn't even include things like numbering your pages. The majority of you didn't number your pages. One person submitted an entire paper to me in 9-point font. Did you really expect me to read that word for word? I mean, I'm almost 53 years old. Yes, my vision is still generally 20/20, and on a good day, it's still 20/15 when I've had enough sleep. But that's for normal stuff. Reading, I need reading glasses, and most of the time more times than not, I end up using my reading glasses to read stuff. You put something in 9-point, I'm going to miss things, right? That's why you say 12-point, right? Why are people single spacing? It was clearly said, folks, you lost points for all these, and some folks did more than one in terms of basic instructions. Like they missed like 5 of these things in the instructions. That's why you lost more points for that, right? And then on the side here, I couldn't find enough space because I wanted to keep it all on one page. We can see, who's we? I mean, there's these invitations, these break into the fourth wall invitations in your essays. Sometimes you break the fourth wall by saying, well, let me tell you what I think. Well, that's what the essay's for. You don't actually literally have to say, let me tell you what I think in order to tell me what you think, or tell someone else what you think. Same thing goes as we can see, we can observe, we can conclude. Who's this we? You're not doing a presentation. You're not lecturing like I have to do twice a week for each of your classes. You're not, giving a conference, you're on a conference panel or doing a television interview. You're writing. You don't need to say we can see, or we can conclude, because you're not speaking for anyone other than yourself. So just tell us what you conclude without saying that we can see, we can remember, you don't know. You don't know who's reading this stuff. You have some idea who your audience is going to be, but you don't assume that I can see anything, right? That's very ableist of you to do so. So there's that. Now there's some specific things, right? Let me scroll down a little bit so that folks can see, right? This is specific to, mostly this is specific to HS 103, but some of it can also be applied to HS 358D as well, right? I can't believe the number of people who did not notice that Gatsby was basically Jewish. His original name is Getz. Let me just make sure that folks can see that. Let me put my skills to the test here a little bit. I'm going to put this in bright yellow, right? Getz. That's a Jewish last name, right? And the racism he suffers from and that he tries to bury in terms of his own life, in terms of not knowing who his parents are supposedly dead, which they're not, and he doesn't seem to have a life before he gets to New York and all that other stuff, right? Is that he's Jewish. He's not black. He's not trying to hide blackness the way Clara Kendry is in Passing, right? But he's still not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And in the 1920s, in order to be considered white, this is in the 1920s, this is today, although there's some people who are like Kanye West who have some issues with Jews anyway, despite all of this, right? If you're not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you are not considered fully white. White in a social constructed, your dominant part of the master race kind of way, right? This is the height of eugenics in the United States, right? In terms of everyday culture, in terms of science, and so on and so forth. The 1920s are. So, of course, Gatsby's going to try to bury his Jewish heritage, being around these hoity-toity white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who are made of old money, in some cases are made of new money. So if that's the case, then there's no reason to go there in terms of, oh, they didn't Fitzgerald didn't talk about race in the book. He did talk about race, just didn't talk about Black people, right? He excluded Black people from his book, but his main character is Jewish. He didn't literally spell it out to you. Hey guys, my main character is Jewish, but he gave you every hint in the world to let you know that this person wasn't WASP, right? So that's a big one. One that was common across both classes, using terms like minorities and people of color and persons of color. Instead of saying Black or African American, when you know the person you're talking about is Black or African American. Why? I don't understand. Same thing with whites, the same thing with racism. Don't say this is disgusting and horrible, blah, 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 blah. It's racism. Just call it what it is. I said this before you wrote your first draft. I said this after you wrote your first drafts and I took a look at them. I'm saying it again. You call people by what they were called in that time to the extent that you can without offending people, right? You know, without the N word's an exception. That's always going to be offensive. Try not to offend people without people like me, right? But also, you don't need to be so oblique, right? So, I'm not going to, I'm going to just use persons of color, minorities, or other stuff. The person's Black, they're Black. If they're African American, they're African American. If they're you also don't avoid using the term biracial if you can stick it in the fact that, oh, these people might be biracial in this, even though that's not the term for this period, but make sure you consistently use the word Black with along with it. Don't hide that, but don't use biracial as a substitute either, because this is the time period is a time period where they're not going to see themselves as biracial the way people see themselves as biracial and different in that sense in this period, right? And the last one, which is specific to HS 103, passing. White folks pass for white too, which relates to the Gatsby angle, right? Not just Black people, white people pass for Black. Latinos, pass for white. Latinos pass for white. It's one of the reasons why even though there was a ban on Blacks and Latinx people playing in the major leagues in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, right? Actually, 1910s as well. Even though there was a ban for nearly all the first half of the 20th century, there were some folks with Spanish last names who were technically Latinx who played baseball. You know why? Because they looked white, right? They could get away with it because they actually looked white, right? And so they could say they were Spanish without necessarily saying that they were, from Cuba or from Puerto Rico or from the Republic of Dominica or anywhere else for that matter. So there's that. And so, there were assumptions around all this. And there are also assumptions, and I'll leave this one there because I didn't have room for this, and only maybe 3 or 4 people did this. But there's this idea, particularly in HS 358D, where somehow, because now we've talked to death about slavery, that we can put the past behind us and move forward. How did you miss the main thing, the sort of motivator for Colson Whitehead writing the Underground Railroad? The idea that, well, the effects of slavery, not only on African Americans, but on this country as a whole, still around to this day because there are laws in place, there are policies in place that come out of that history, right? To put it another way, there is nothing new under the sun. And to act like we suddenly, all of a sudden, have moved away from slavery because we're in the 2020s instead of the 1920s, instead of the 1820s, and to say that let's leave the past in the past and somehow move forward and act like we're on level playing field. Well, no, we're not all the same because you don't know the game. To quote Public Enemy, right? And as long as there are people in this country who believe in the ideology that white is right, and some people are better than others, and therefore deserve, in terms of power and money and wealth, things that the other people and blame other people for their own lot in life as if it's solely about individual achievement when we know that there are policies in place that have kept people consistently from holding on to wealth, that kept people consistently having any sense of power at all, that have kept folks from being able to make their lives better. I think that's an ostrich sticking their head in the sand, and I mean that's not the point of this course, to make yourself feel better because you're taking the course in African American history. I'm sorry, that's not what the course is for, right? To make you feel like that you're less racist or more enlightened or whatever it is that you're looking for, some sort of affirmation from this course. You're here to learn. And that means learning that the legacy of slavery, in terms of not just in terms of the psychological impact, but in terms of actual policy, still with us. That's what Colson Whitehead's entire book was basically about. However well he executed it is another story, but that's what this book was about. And to sort of say we got to put the past in the past and just move forward from this point. Why are we having this conversation? Why are we doing this course if that's what you're coming out of the course with? So that's sort of why I want to finish up with. But in general, despite all of this, despite all of these issues, most of you, the vast majority of you, I think like 2/3, maybe 3/4 of a class, essentially have a grade between a B plus and an A plus. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. And when you account for the other folks, no, I mean, I would say that 90% of the class, somewhere around 90% of the class, has a grade of basically a solid C or higher, meaning 75 or higher. And so, and yeah, 90% of the class, 75 or higher, probably 85% of the class, 80 or higher. Those are good numbers. Those are really good numbers for a survey level course where I challenge you to do work. I am going to have to tweak this process to be sure, make more things like peer review required, or you lose points on your on the final draft of your essay, and not just on your participation grade. I'm going to have to figure out ways to basically force you to not do work at the last minute. Maybe you have to turn in something every single week, and maybe if you do enough sleepless nights on Sundays, you'll go, maybe I should just do the work during the week like you're supposed to, right? That kind of thing. So, but anyway, I am mostly happy with what I've seen. I'm definitely happy with folks who managed to do critical book reviews, managed to do opinion pieces, who managed to do personal essays, who took unique takes, who took chances, right? Part of this is give you the space to take a chance, right? So there's that. One other thing, and I'll let this go. An opinion essay is an essay of interpretation. It is not pure opinion. No matter, they call it an opinion essay because it is based on something you believe, so that makes it an opinion. But if you've noticed, the majority of people who write opinion essays in newspapers and magazines, on news organization sites like yours truly, have expertise in what they're talking about, right? They can use personal experience to help inform things, but they're not literally going with their gut in order to address different things. And so there's that aspect of things too. But the truth is, take chances. You can't you don't write these things right the first time. You don't get it perfect with the first draft or even the second draft. And so the very fact that so many of you were able to build on first drafts and build and fill out second drafts and knock things out of the park or get it mostly right. That's for me, that was the goal. That was ultimately the goal for me. So I'm mostly pleased with what I've seen. I'm told you all the things I'm not pleased with. You see the list. So let me stop the share and say thanks again. And if you have any questions, please ask me, Thursday during office hours, because I'll have to do some virtual office hours again tomorrow. And, or down in the line through an email in the future. So thank you.